and I'm just going to tell you about my story, getting diagnosis, and the challenges that I faced. So when I started in primary school, I was described as different, and they said I had intellectual disabilities. I was brought by my mother to so many different specialists all over the country. There was no supports that I could go to locally in Waterford again. I was brought to Dublin to occupational therapists. I'd go into a therapist, they'd diagnose me with autism, then we'd come out and my mother again would be like, there's something different, I know it's not that that's challenging her. I went to Wicklow to educational therapists, and I would go to so many different occupational physios, every possible support you could think of, and they'd all give me a different diagnosis every single time. So I would come out with so many different things. I'd be on the spectrum, I'd be dyspraxic, every type of thing you could think of, but none of them were making sense, and they were not describing what I was doing. They described what I was doing as wrong. I would sit down on a chair, I'd fall off the chair. They'd say she had no coordination. In primary school, I'd be writing, I'd only write on a certain half of the page and I'd leave the other one, and they'd always be telling me I was doing it wrong, and everything was different to what they thought I should be doing it. And when I'd be in primary school, they'd write the work up on the board, I wouldn't take it down. They'd tell me I was bold, that nothing I was doing was right, and I couldn't explain to them what I was doing because I didn't fully understand why I couldn't write it down. I would write down my homework, I'd have it all wrote down wrong. And so it was challenging in primary school to try and explain to them what I was doing was different. And after I came back from the first occupational therapist in Dublin with the diagnosis of autism, I came into school and I had a weighted jacket put on me, and I had to be taken out in front of everyone in the school, and they'd tell me, Katelyn, get up, put on your jacket. And it was humiliating as a child when you didn't understand why you had to do this, and you felt like everyone was looking at you, and like as a young girl anyway, you kind of just want to fit in and not be pointed out, standing out. And I had like cushions to sit on that, to me, I still to this day don't know what the purpose was because they made no sense. I had words to write on, and because of in primary school with this, I got good help from my principal in St. Mary's Primary School, and I got assistive technology, so I was able to, like that in primary school was the biggest benefit to me. I got to type out all of my work, so everything was already becoming easier. And then I went into secondary school in Ortsville, so I know your daughter too. And I went into secondary school, and the principal, at first, she said, no, there's no need for you to have assistive technology because the diagnosis wasn't on paper for what I actually had. And so I had nothing. And when I went on holidays that summer, I was in Portugal, and I was sitting at the pool by my mother, and I got up out of the pool and I looked at her and I said, I can only see half of you, I don't know where you're gone. And she didn't understand how I couldn't see her. So we went over to the chemists in Portugal and they gave me eye drops, and it didn't help. So I came back from my holidays and I went to Specsavers here in Dungarvan, where they did a screening of my eyes. And first of all, it was a young nurse as well, so she read the screening and she got a bit of a shock, and she said she saw a black space at the back of my eye. So I was sent to Waterford to Mr. Stokes, where he did more screenings, and he said I had left homonymous hemanopia, which is basically the left of each eye is completely blind. And at that stage we didn't know what further to do because they couldn't find a cause straight away. So without a diagnosis, you can't get any supports. So we went to Cork as well, and we had MRAs. I had multiple scans in Cork on the brain where they couldn't do anything, and we had to go private because again they told us if we wanted to do a public, we'd be on a waiting list for 2 years, and even going private, we were on this waiting list for over a year and a half, maybe even 2 years, so it didn't make much of a difference. And we went and we got MRIs, and they still couldn't say why this was happening. So we went to meet a neurologist in Cork, and we've only met her since this diagnosis 3 years ago. We've only met her about 4 times because they're always overbooked and stuff. So she sent us in October of this year to Cork to get a lumbar puncture. So I had a lumbar puncture where they took out the spinal fluid to test it, and again we went back to her in February of this year, which was like 5 months afterwards, and they still didn't have results on her papers, so we went up to her and she couldn't tell us anything more. And I always had headaches at the back of my head, and I was always nauseous over everything I ate and everything. So the first time I noticed this headache, I was in 4th class, and I had just come back from holidays again, and I had a severe headache, and I was in so much pain that I went up to my mother and I was like, look, like I have really good pain tolerance, but this was like excruciating pain. So I went to Arkeen Hospital straight away after going to the doctors, and they said they thought I had meningitis, but they didn't test for it because my bloods were normal, and since then I've always had those headaches, and they think that this